Hi everyone, welcome at Wayfact. Another Thursday, another Q&A with Ernesto. As you can see, our company mascot is already super excited. And today we will talk about software agencies in general, or agencies, and why they have such a bad reputation, and what we as clients, people working with those agencies could actually do to increase the likelihood that, what we are trying to build with them actually results into something, also in something that helps us achieve our goals. So the first thing I want to highlight here, or by the way, before we start, if you have any questions, if you want to discuss with me, please be encouraged to write below, also in the comment section, your questions. I will try to answer them, and really, whatever concerns you have, let me know. And yeah, so this is supposed to be quite an interactive session, just 15 minutes. And yeah, otherwise, if there are no questions, I will just, do my monologue and try to let some value here. And yeah, thanks for watching. So, starting out, agencies or software agencies in general have a reputation problem, an image problem. But why is that so? And I think one of the main drivers, main reasons is because agencies and clients themselves, like that full agency model, there's something like a conflict of interest. And the conflict here is like an agency itself, like that's the default thought model if you're a service provider. You want, of course, to collect as much cash as possible, like as much payment as possible, for as little time and effort as possible. And on the other hand, of course, the client wants the exact opposite. Well, that alone doesn't make an issue, right? Because if you think about products, it's the exact same thing. You have a product, you want to produce it in as cheaply and quickly as possible, and at the same time, the client wants to have it for as little money as possible. So that's kind of, the baseline. It's for everything the same. With one single difference, the margins for products can be much larger depending on the industry and the product you're working with. So that allows you for a little bit more flexibility or freedom in that regard. If you're a service provider, you already have much more costs because your product is a service, which is denoted in time, and that is denoted in workforce. That is usually quite expensive depending on where you live. And usually it's always the most expensive thing, even if you're developers or what your employees, your team is from South America or wherever, right? It's always the most expensive, the largest expenditure, basically. So the next thing then is, and I think that's the main driver of why agencies, have such a bad reputation, and it absolutely makes sense, and it's right so. If you're an agency like ourselves, you have that, if you're just starting out as an agency, or you don't want to actively create value for your clients because you're short-term minded, you tend to think about, let's try to get as many projects as possible, like ideally as at maximum capacity, which is again against the constraints or against the desire of a client. A client always wants to have your maximum focus for his or her product. So that's again another mismatch. And the same thing applies for most often, not always though, clients want to reduce the amount of time of engagement to as little as possible because that means they pay less and have less dependence on you. While on the other hand, if you're an agency, you want to extend it to as much time as possible, depending on your engagement for sure. If you have a fixed price, usually you want to have something like a recurring model, subscription, or anything like that, maintenance fee, depending on what kind of agencies you are engaging with. And if you are more kind of let's say, yeah, you basically usually tend to try to extract as much value as possible, right? Because service business is hard. That's the thing, right? The only thing, and that's where I see an industry shift happening right now, and that's where I want to draw a conclusion here in this session today, is most agencies start to rebrand themselves. They don't want to be something like we are an agency, you have a problem, we build it for you. But we need to place a paid ad or something, or we want to build that MVP. How can we get that software product started? That's just one single service you basically as an agency used to or still oftentimes provide to your client. But the services around that are oftentimes neglected, which result in the client or you in that case maybe to lose money. Right? Just imagine you're a startup, for example, and you're convinced now is the time to build your proof of concept, your MVP, to raise more money from investors, or to attract your first client, or something like that. So the thing now is, let's imagine you're maybe less experienced in that regard, so you don't come up with the know-how yourself, and you rely on the software agency to maybe tell you proactively if there's maybe a better approach than just building your software. For example, in our case, if startups approach us, hey, I want to build that and this, then the first thing always I ask is, what do you want to achieve with that? Right? Because that actually is the KPI, the metric on how they actually then are able to proceed with you or without you or just being successful on themselves. In terms of startups, their goal might be to build a community with potential buyers, clients, user base, something like that. It might be to raise more investor capital. It might be to actually directly attract a user base by just having a product here, whatever, right? There are a lot of ways how you can launch a product, especially a software product. And the thing now is, most often, especially in that specific case, you shouldn't build the software, right? For example, many startups, I tell them, hey, did you think about if you just want to raise capital, is maybe just designing a really fancy, cool mock-up or a pitch deck or something like that, maybe the better approach to achieve raising more capital and visualizing what your software product is ultimately going to do. Because if your proof of concept or MVP is just supposed to be something like that you use for presentations or for raising capital, then why should you actually build the software? It just consumes much more capital, most likely will look much worse than you actually would need it to look like in order to raise capital. And that's the first issue, right? That's where if you're just thinking as an agency, you would just say, okay, let me build that for you. It will be awesome. We will do our best, and of course they can have great intentions. But if you're just an agency and you do just agency like as a service provider, that's not enough, right? The client, and that's why many people oftentimes have a negative association with service providers, they oftentimes don't actively have the interests of the client in mind, what they want to achieve. They get the orders and they just do it. And that's, of course, okay if the client knows what they want and do. And that most often, most clients don't know that because there's a reason they engage with a software agency. And that's one of the values an agency can bring with, right? Otherwise, you could just either hire an internal team, if that makes sense, of course, depending on the project, or contract a couple of freelancers or just one freelancer, depending on the size of the project. And everywhere you have the same issues, right? But an agency exactly gives you that value prop of giving you like one specific person or a company in that case to talk to that gives you an all-round, let's say, honest feedback, like from a partnership perspective. That's your goal. How are we going to achieve it? Is it by implementing software? Great, okay, let's do that. How can we make that software as fast, cheap, and quick as possible in order to achieve that goal? Because if it still has to be depending on if you just want to get your first client. What, for example, is the minimal happy path? You don't want to build out all features yet, which is great from an agency perspective, because you can charge a lot of money. But from a client perspective, you usually just want to have that or identify that core feature that you actually want to create value for your clients, right? From a software agency client perspective. So that's what you should always keep in mind, right? When you approach agencies or work with agencies, try to evaluate, like, do they try to bring that superior partnership perspective to your project, or do they just try to implement, like, give you what you're asking for? Both, of course, can be fine, but usually a partner agency, yeah, and there are already a lot of good actors out there, they give you like a full overview of what makes sense, what could be an easier, cheaper approach. They play the long game, right? If that means they earn a little bit less money in the short term, even I lost a lot of clients by telling them blockchain doesn't make sense for you. You shouldn't use blockchain in that case, for example, or do a mock-up instead, or all these sorts of things. So I missed out on definitely a lot of six-figure profits on that, or at least revenue, and I'm fine with that. And I think a lot of other agencies are too, and that's why they usually don't even brand themselves as agencies. That's something I most recently learned. For example, a befriended agency of mine doesn't brand themselves as software agency, although they are technically one, but as product studio or something like that. Digital product studio, which is genius, right? It communicates exactly that. What do you need to build a product? The full thing around that, whatever is needed, right? You want to have a product that sells, or a product that you can raise money with. And an agency just provides you with that software part. Product studio gives you the full part. The same thing obviously also applies to marketing agencies and all these other things, because of course, if you tell them I want to have paid ads, okay, I will create a marketing campaign for you. But if they have that business perspective in mind, your goal, your interests, your superior interests, then they might approach it differently. They might say, hey, well, instead of just scheduling your paid ads campaign, what do you want to achieve with that? Do you just want to create brand awareness, create leads, or or do you just want to collect a lot of learning so that you can do it internally? And then build the strategy around that. And I'm not in the marketing business, I have no idea. Of course, there are a lot of other things you definitely could do as well, but I think you get what I mean, right? So it's really a lot about understanding the superior goal of what you or your client wants to achieve, and then focusing on that, and not on the tasks, on the activities. And that's just, I think, why many people lose a lot of money with agencies. Of course, there are other reasons too, just incompetent developers, or I think that's the main reason in terms of software agencies. That's why we have, for example, that money back guarantee for the last 7 days if you're not satisfied. But those are, I think, the things that you always should keep in mind when working with agencies or freelancers. Do they have that superior vision? And if they don't, if you don't need it, that's fine. But if you need it, try to find an agency. Doesn't need to be us. There are a lot of super smart agencies and people out there that actually help you achieve your goals. And that should be, your intention reaching out with or working with external providers. That they understand what you want to accomplish, and not just see the task, what are the system requirements, and just do that, right? Of course, if you're a corporate or tend to think like a corporate, that's usually the approach you're choosing. Here is the requirement sheet, implement that. Okay, if you think already you understand all the surroundings, what you want to do, that's fine. But most likely you don't. So I hope that brought you some value. As always, 15 minutes. And yeah, please leave your feedback below, and maybe also topic suggestions. If you say, Kev, could you talk about these kind of things in future? happy to do so. And yeah, the reason I'm talking a little bit fast today is I'm hungry, so please bear with me. And yeah, thank you for watching. Stay tuned.